don't know, we have already been talking about the Holocaust and reading some books about it. So a lot of people in here may have already went to the trip about it, and it was a horrible thing. And I would like to introduce Miss Eva Wiener to the Boulder Middle School.
Good morning. No, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay. Now, when you think of Holocaust survivors, you think of somebody like Anne Frank that you saw the exhibit, or somebody like that had a number tattooed on their arm, or was a hidden child. There are many stories that Holocaust survivors can tell that picture them as a survivor, and I didn't fit any of those categories. So for many years, I never considered myself a Holocaust survivor because I had none of those typical pictures of what a Holocaust survivor had gone through. Eventually, I changed my mind, and I hope you'll agree with me when I'm finished. Let me tell you about my families. My mother's family and my father's family both came from Poland. And during the early 1900s, life in Poland for the Jewish people was made very difficult with something called pogroms, which were fights by the police and the military against the Jewish population. So a lot of people left Poland. My parents, with their families, left and traveled through Europe looking for a safe place to be. They went to many countries, but both of them ended up in Berlin, Germany. Now, Berlin, the capital of Germany, was a gorgeous city, very sophisticated. Lots of theaters and lots of museums and many higher education facilities, lots of schools, and it was a very welcoming place. All children were allowed to go to public school, people were allowed to earn a living, and things were very quiet and very calm and very nice. My father was one of 8 children, and my grandparents opened a bakery. So all the kids worked in the bakery, which was the way it was in those days. My mother was one of 4. And life was pretty good. But something happened in the early 30s, known as the Nuremberg Laws. Now, these laws were proclaimed by the Nazi Party that came into power, the head of which was Adolf Hitler. The Nuremberg Laws said no Jewish children were permitted to go to public school anymore. A Jewish doctor couldn't treat anybody other than Jewish patients. A Jewish businessman could not do business with anybody other than other Jews. So things in Germany got very uncomfortable for the Jewish population. And many people saw this as being a threat, so they left. My father's parents, 1 brother and 3 sisters, decided to get out of Germany. And they left for a place called Palestine. That's now the country of Israel. By the time my parents met, life in Germany was terrible. They tried to get out, but many avenues were closed. Then something happened on November 9th, 1938. Something called Kristallnacht. Anybody hear of it? It's called the Night of Broken Glass. And it's called that because that was the night that the military, the police, stormed the streets and smashed the windows of every business that was owned by Jews. smashed the windows and burned the synagogues, the Jewish houses of worship, burned their prayer books, destroyed their businesses. This was the beginning of the Holocaust. The next day, my father was taken out of the apartment and put on a train with hundreds and hundreds of other men. And he was being sent back to what they called country of origin, which meant that he was born in Poland, so they were sending them to Warsaw, the capital of Poland. And he found himself in a one-bedroom apartment, sharing it with 12 other men. Tiny quarters, but the worst of it was, they didn't know why, or what was going to happen to their family that they were taken away from back in Germany. My mother panicked. She didn't know what to do. Finally, she was told that if by some chance she could get a way of leaving the country, maybe my dad would be able to come back from Poland and join her, on the condition they left right away, though. My mother and her two sisters started standing on lines. Every consulate, every embassy. Sometimes they waited for days online. Any country that would issue them something called a visa. That's not a MasterCard Visa kind of thing. This visa is a piece of paper that allows you to enter another country. It's permission to go to a welcoming country. My mother was thrilled. She got a visa to Siam. Nobody never has heard of Siam, right? Only if you saw The King and I. Siam is now known as Thailand. Now, if you know anything about geography, Thailand is a country over there in the Far East by Japan and China. And it's a very poor country, very undeveloped. It's called a third world country. My mother didn't care. She now had a piece of paper that said we can leave Germany. So she took the paper to the police station and registered it. And then my father was able to make his way back from Poland, back to Berlin, to join her so they could immediately leave the country. But my mother was smart. Her brother had gone to Cuba. So she sent him money and asked him if he could get a visa to Cuba. In the meantime, while my father was traveling back from Poland to Germany, the visa for Cuba came. Now, making a decision of which country to go to was pretty simple. Cuba is a magnificent vacation island in the Caribbean. All the cruise ships went there. Or going to a third world country like Thailand, then Siam. Not knowing anybody there, of course. So the choice was not a difficult one. My parents decided they wanted to go to Cuba, especially since Cuba was only 90 miles off the coast of America. And we were eventually wanting to come to America. We even had what they call immigration numbers to allow us to come into the United States. But sometimes you could wait a year or two before your number was accepted. So what better place for our number to be accepted than in Cuba? So my mother was able to book passage on a ship called the SS St. Louis. It was owned by the Hamburg America line, and it left from Hamburg, Germany. So my parents took what few things they were allowed to take. They only were allowed to take a limited amount of money, only one suitcase per person. And we got on a train and went to Hamburg, to the dock. Now here we are at this dock of Hamburg with this gorgeous cruise ship sitting there. And there were banners flying, and there was a band playing, and there was a photographer running around taking pictures of everybody. It was very festive. It was beautiful. And the headlines in the newspaper read, 937 Jewish passengers are going on this beautiful cruise ship, and their destination is Havana, Cuba. Wow, this is great. Getting out of Germany, first of all, and away from all this Nazi persecution. And what better way to go than on this beautiful cruise ship? So we get on the ship, and things are lovely. There are dances and parties and movies and typical cruise ship. And then we get to Havana Harbor, and they don't let us dock. They keep us in the harbor. And nobody understands what's going on. Why? I mean, our suitcases are packed and ready to get off the ship, and they're not letting us get off. They're not even docking the ship. So then a little boat comes out to the ship, and the captain's meeting with these people, and they look very military and very influential type people, and nobody knows what's going on. Finally, my uncle gets on a little boat, comes out to the ship, and yells at my parents. They're up on deck, and he's down in this little boat, and they're screaming at each other, "Mañana, mañana." That's Spanish. They speak Spanish in Cuba. It means tomorrow. Why was he saying that? Because he felt that this was all just red tape and everything was going to be smoothed out, and by tomorrow you'll get off the ship. Well, that didn't happen. You see, the ship was chosen by the Nazi propaganda machine in Germany to show the world that these 900 Jewish passengers were unwanted cargo. And he had infiltrated, or the Nazi propaganda machine infiltrated the president of Cuba, President Brew, and had influence over him, and told him in no uncertain terms, "You will not allow these people in." And he said, "Okay." Because you see, he was corrupt also. And he found out that the visas that we had, that we paid a lot of money for, he didn't get any of it. The man who issued the visas pocketed all the money. He didn't like that too much. So he had no problem in saying, "Okay, papers are worthless, I won't recognize them, and you can't get off." The headline in the German newspaper that announced our departure now read, "Jews not permitted entry into Cuba. You see, the world doesn't want them. We're going to do the world a favor, and we're going to eliminate them for you." Trying to tell the world that they are going to eliminate the Jewish people. So now there's all this negotiation going on. You see, the captain was not a member of the Nazi Party, so that he did not condone all that was going on. And he was desperate to tell, and my mother said, he got on the public address system and he promised the passengers that under no circumstances would he take the ship back to Germany with the passengers. He would try anything in his power to go anywhere else in the world rather than bring them back to Germany, because he knew what would happen to them if they went back. And then he said, "You know, we're only 90 miles away from Miami. Let me see if the United States will take us." So he turned the ship around and he got to so close to Miami, my dad said you could almost read the license plates on the cabs on Ocean Avenue. That's how close we were to America. But the minute that happened, the Coast Guard came out and sent us away from American waters. They were afraid somebody might jump ship or try to swim ashore. God knows what would happen. And they threw us out of American waters. A telegram sent to the president was never answered. They didn't want any part of us. We were only 900 people. You probably have 900 kids in your school. Not a lot of people. Any country could have accepted us. Now there was all this negotiation. They contacted every country of the world, begging, pleading for somebody to take us. But the captain had no choice. He had to turn the ship back towards Europe because he was running low on fuel and supplies. And by the time we got back to Europe, 4 countries agreed to take some of the passengers. No one country said, oh, I'll take the whole bunch. So the passenger list was divided into 4 pieces. Belgium, France, Holland, and England were the 4 countries that agreed to take some passengers. My father was a very wise man. And I used to ask him, why did you choose England? He says, I wanted to get as far away from Germany as possible. And he said, maybe that English Channel that divides Europe and England might protect us. Little did he know that within weeks, the 3 countries were invaded by the Nazi troops and overrun. And England was the only country that fought against the German troops. So now we are in England, living in London. Suddenly we are getting bombed. And we're living in shelters. And houses are being destroyed. And people are killed all the time because of German bombings. But my life in England was nothing compared to what it would have been had we gone to Belgium, France, or Holland. Because most of those people didn't survive the war. And we lived in England till the end of the war. In 1946, we came to the United States. And we came by ship and docked in New York, and it was Memorial Day weekend. Only one problem. There was a dock strike. And we couldn't get off the ship. So it was a little frightening. We thought maybe we'd have the same problem that we had in Cuba. But fortunately, after the weekend, the dock strike was ended and we were able to get off the ship. And that was May, so we spent the summer in Belmar, New Jersey, where one of my aunts had settled. But my other aunt got us an apartment in Astoria, New York. So we went to Astoria, and I spent my childhood there. But I married a man from Belmar. So that brought me back to New Jersey. And we got married Memorial Day weekend. So it's a very important time in my life. 56 years. He put up with me all these times. That's basically my story. But the reason I found the definition of survivor does fit me is because the ship was singled out to be a significant demonstration of what the Nazi plan was. Here we were, 900 plus people that did nothing but belong to the wrong religion. The Nazis were determined to eliminate, first by getting them out of Germany, and those that remained to be annihilated, to be done away with. That's what prejudice, bigotry, hate, and anti-Semitism can lead to. I have a homework assignment for you. I know nobody likes to do homework. However, this homework assignment doesn't have to be completed for 20 years. Okay? But I have to have your promise that you will complete it. The assignment is this. Because we survivors are getting on in years, you will be the last to see survivors in the flesh. Who is going to tell the story of the survivors? You are. So your assignment is to pass on the message to your children, your grandchildren, all your relatives and friends. Because if we don't combat hate and bigotry and prejudice, when it starts, we might live to see it happen again. We have seen other genocides. Genocides in Rwanda, Cambodia, even now in Syria. These tragedies are still happening. And unless we stand up when we see bullying and prejudice and hate and fight against it, it will fester and it will grow. And God forbid, it will grow into another Holocaust. 11 million people, not soldiers, not people in uniform, civilians, were slaughtered for no reason other than they were different. Their religion was different. They might have been Jehovah's Witnesses. They might have been Roma or Gypsy, Catholic priests, the disabled, the mentally retarded. Many categories of people were slaughtered for no reason other than they were hated. And if we do not stand up, I pity the world for what might happen. Does everybody accept my homework assignment?
Yes.
Thank you. That's basically my story. I hope a lot of you have questions that I would hope to be able to answer. Thank you.
Just raise your hand.
You have to stand up and speak loud, because I'm an old lady and I don't hear so good.
When the economic
Loud.
When the economic crash, was that when everything started?
I didn't hear you say.
When the economic depression started, is that when everything started?
An economic depression? Yes, it had some bearing. The German government lost the First World War. They were in a depression. This man, Adolf Hitler, charismatic speaker, promised them they would return to their magnificence. And they followed him because he promised the revival of Germany.
Who else, guys?
Somebody's got to have questions. I left a lot of holes in my story that you'd like to fill in. Yes?
How old were you when, like alive in the United States?
Okay. That's a good question. On the ship, I was the youngest girl. I was 10 months old. So I don't have any conscious memory of the ship itself. But I was very fortunate because my parents shared the story with me long before I ever had any reason to think it was important. You know how Folks might tell you where they came from or how they got to New Jersey, or they came from another state or another country. My parents told me the story of the St. Louis, but I never knew it had importance. I never realized of its significance and that I was part of history. So when the book, and I have a copy of it, The Voyage of the Damned, was written, all of a sudden, all the stories my parents had told me were verified by the book. That other passengers that survived told the same stories. So even though I was very young, I knew what had happened and why the ship did what it did. I came to the United States, I was not quite 8 years old. And a very traumatic thing happened. Because I was living in England during the heavy bombing and spent many hours in shelters, I had what is now called PSTD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I came to America and I heard a siren on a fire engine or an ambulance or a police car. I would either jump under my desk if I was in school or run into the closet because I thought it was an air raid and we were going to be bombed. And it took me a long time to understand the difference in sirens, and that I didn't have to be afraid of being bombed. For a long time, even the fire drills scared the hell out of me. So this was a trauma that I experienced even at the age of 8. It took me a while to get used to it. The kids in America used to laugh at me. I mean, what is she doing? Is she nuts? But it was because of what I had experienced that scared me. Yes? Was I treated differently when I was in school? In America, you mean? Yeah. They used to call me names. I had a British accent. Didn't sound like everybody else. And again, I was dumb enough to run into the closet every time I heard a siren. Now, that's pretty stupid. But, again, it's not the fault of the kids. That's what they learned. To them, my actions were funny and silly. Back there.
How did your father get back when you guys were about to leave?
Could you interpret for me, please? I can't hear.
How did your father get back to be able to join you on the ship? Like, how was he able to make his way back after being sent?
He was able to take a train. It took him a while. It took him about 2 weeks to get from Warsaw, Poland, back to Berlin. I'm sorry. I'm screwing up the camera here.
Were there any repercussions for the captain that tried to save you all?
That's an interesting question, too. The captain actually was our savior. And my mother used to say that. She says, if not for that captain, we never would have made it, because he was determined to save his passengers. When he went back to Germany, they took his commission away. He was no longer allowed to serve as a captain or in the military at all. And he lived out the whole war in poverty. When the survivors of the St. Louis found out, they sent him money to keep him well and fed, and they also nominated him as a righteous among the nations, which is a special honor at the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, Israel. I was privileged in November to pay special tribute and place a flower at his name, which was in the press and everything else, to honor him for having saved his passengers. Yes?
When you were in school, how often did they talk about you being in the Holocaust or the Holocaust?
He never did. The question was, in school, how often did I talk about? As I said, I never thought of myself as a survivor. I never thought of myself as having anything to do with the Holocaust, other than having escaped. And only because I'm part of that passenger list. It was a very difficult trip. Not that I have any memory. I knew where my father's business was, I knew where our apartment was, and I went to visit them, and they no longer existed. But unfortunately, while I was there, I encountered anti-Semitism again. We were a group of 90 people, and while we were with our group, everybody was treated royally and beautifully. Beautiful hotel, lovely places to go and visit, but we were very well guarded. We had police escorts everywhere we went, because things are not as rosy as they may appear. And my husband and I went out on our own, because I speak German without any problem and can get by easily. I encountered anti-Semitism on a one-to-one, where a taxi driver refused to take me because I said I was Jewish because I wanted to go to the Jewish cemetery. He didn't want to take me. So there is anti-Semitism still present, at least in Berlin. Yes.
How do you think you would interpret this?
Louder, louder, louder.
How do you think you would have interpreted this differently if you weren't Jewish?
How do you think you would have interpreted this differently if you weren't Jewish? Do you mean the war, Allie?
Yeah.
It affected Jews to the greatest extent. But we were not the only victims of the Holocaust. I said 1.5 million children were killed during the Holocaust. Now, what was their transgression? What did they do to have something like that happen to them? The Nazi Party did not stop at the Jewish population. They went on to hate and destroy others as well. So you don't have to be Jewish to have a connection to the Holocaust. We do, because we lost so many. One people lost 6 million Jews. The numbers are mind-boggling. But today we also have to be afraid of something else. And that is those who deny that the Holocaust happened. We cannot permit anyone to distort history by denying that the Holocaust was as tragic as it was. And the numbers can be verified. As a matter of fact, there are new archives being opened now around the world that put the number at 17 million, not 11, of total people that were killed. Now, when we think of millions, the number is mind-boggling. Imagine how many of those millions could have been other Einsteins, or people who had found the cure for cancer. Great minds, great people were among all that 17 or 11, or how many million people were destroyed for no reason. How can we do that and allow it to happen? Yes, yes.
How long were you guys on the ship for from after you left Germany to?
The ship was actually gone for 4 weeks. We went from Hamburg to Cuba to Miami to Antwerp, Belgium. Everybody got off in Antwerp, in Belgium. Those that were assigned to Belgium stayed there. Those that were assigned to France and Holland got on trains. And we who were going to England got on a train, on a little transport ship to England. You want to ask a question?
Did your parents ever think about going there, like going to Thailand?
Going to Siam.
Yeah.
Did my parents ever think of going to Siam? No, not really. There was really no interest. We didn't have anybody there. It wasn't as if there was something there to draw them. Yes?
Would it have been better if you went to Siam instead?
Can't hear you.
Do you think it would have been better if they'd gone to Siam instead of getting onto the ship?
Probably. But who's to know? I don't know what my life in Siam would have been. I have no idea. It's hard to say. I can only tell you what actually happened, not what might have. Anything else? Yes.
Do you know if there was any Germans at all on the ship?
Was there any what?
Germans at all on the ship?
Yes, there were. The Nazi Party had actually placed some of their spies and agents into the passengers, and the captain found one, and he found out that he was working for the Nazi government, and he put him in the brig, in the jail, in the basement of the ship, because he didn't want any part of that. He did not want his passengers treated any differently than on any other cruise ship. So he told his crew, you will treat these people as if they were on any other cruise that you were dealing with. Yes?
How old was your family when you were on the ship?
How old?
Was your family when you were on the ship?
My parents were in their 30s and I was 10 months old. Go ahead.
When you were younger and you started growing up in America, did you ever question did you ever question God? Will he change anything?
I didn't hear a word you said. I'm sorry. My hearing is terrible.
He wants to know, did you question God? How could he allow this to happen?
I didn't because I was too young, obviously. My father and mother were very, very religious people. And although life was difficult, I don't think they ever questioned God. And they then interpreted what happened to them as being a signal. And that's what I took from them. That what happened to me then became a lesson that I wanted to share to prevent such tragedies from happening again.
Do you know how many out of the 900 people survived on the ship?
Yes. 2 people from the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. spent 5 years researching every passenger of the ship. And I have a book called Refuge Denied. And they estimate that approximately not quite 300 people did not survive. Those that went to Belgium, Holland, and France. Fortunately, some of those people were able to get out immediately before the Nazis invaded. Others did not. Yes.
Were there any Germans on the ship that weren't they were against what was happening?
What'd you say?
Were there any Germans on the ship that were against what was happening?
I'm not aware. Except I know the captain, of course. I don't know whether any of the crew was in favor of what the captain was doing or was in favor of their Nazi upbringing or not. We don't have those statistics.
How was your parents' like attitude when you guys got to America? Like, was it like good or bad? Like, were they okay? Like, you guys got there?
How was it to come to America? Is
Yeah,
that-
how was like your parents' attitude when you got like how were they like how they feel when they were like,
when we came to America?
Yeah.
You have to understand that the world was a little bit different after the war than it was before. We came here to family that had become very comfortable. So they were relieved because America was the free country and they were coming to family. So they were relieved to be able to do that. We didn't have any family, only some friends in England. So they preferred to come to America.
If you could talk to the captain, what would you ask him?
If you could talk to the captain, what would you ask him?
What would I ask him? What made you so brave to stand up against the Nazi authority and help save us? That's probably what I would ask him. Because in fact it was his hard effort to find a place for us that saved us. And it certainly was a wonderful thing that he did, and I would wonder what motivated him, because doing that did put his family in jeopardy. And he didn't know what would happen. He was a very, very helpful person. Do I know any of the survivors? Yes. We've had some reunions of survivors of the St. Louis. And I've had a wonderful relationship with several of them. And each of their stories is different. One, for example, went to an orphanage in France and was saved by Catholic nuns. One young lady was adopted by a Catholic family, and that saved her life, but her family did not survive. So each one of us have a different story of what happened when we left the ship.
When did you first understand what was happening?
Probably when the book was published. Because, as I said, all the stories that my parents had told me were just that, stories. Until I read the book and understood what the significance of the voyage was, that I realized that I was part of an important part of history.
Do you know did any of your family die? Or no other?
Did you have any family members die during the Holocaust?
Yes. I'm fortunate. I only lost 3 aunts. When the ship docked in Antwerp, Belgium, my aunt and my uncle and my little cousin were on the ship to greet us. We really weren't able to communicate much because they had put up barriers to keep anybody from crossing over. But that aunt, uncle, and cousin were never seen again. A week later, they were sent to Auschwitz and died there. My other 2 aunts, we don't know what their fate was, but we know they didn't survive. Fortunately, as I said, my mother's brother and 2 sisters were able to get out early, as was my father's remaining sisters and brother.
You mentioned having PTSD coming to America, and how was your transition from everything when you started growing up and actually developing into a world not full of war and terrible things?
It took a while for me to get used to America in general and the idea of not necessarily being afraid all the time. But as we grow, we mature. Unfortunately, that's what happened. Yes.
can describe your story in one word, what would that word be?
If you could describe your story in one word, what would that word be?
Amazing. I'm here to talk about it, so it is amazing.
How old were you when they were bombing England?
Well, I lived in England from age 1 to age 7.5. So I remember the bombings very clearly. I remember living in London very, very clearly. And I went back to London and I visited many of the places that I had either lived in or built or been in. Some of the homes that I had once lived in London were demolished by Nazi bombs.
Do you know if there were any like bombs that were like really close?
Yes. We were in a shelter, and my father, because he was a baker, baked at night. And most of the bombings came at night. When he came back to the house after work, we weren't there, and our house was destroyed. It took him about 10 hours to find us in a holding shelter, as they called it. So it was frightening, not knowing if your family was alive or not.
What did you do on your like first birthday?
Didn't hear you.
What did you do on your first birthday? Were you, like,
What did I do on my
first birthday?
first breakdown?
Birthday. First birthday.
My first birthday? No, I didn't. I don't remember that far back. I can remember my 4th birthday. I go back that far. And I had 3 of the neighborhood children came in and we had ice cream and cake. That was my 4th birthday. Yes.
When you first realized how important you are to history, what was your first thoughts?
My first thought was, there's a lesson to be learned here. And that's what I have to do, is share my lesson.
How many other schools have you gone to talk about your story?
How many?
How many other schools have you gone to talk about your story?
Schools? Countless. I've spoken to hundreds of many schools, probably about 50. But I've gone repeatedly to the same school sometimes, just each year. But I speak at colleges. I speak for organizations. I had the honor of being in Israel for a program on St. Louis in November. I was at Harvard University 2 weeks ago doing a program up there. I'm going to be at University of Maryland in October, Princeton University in September, and Columbia University in November. So we go to colleges, we go to schools, public schools, organizations, churches, wherever. Yes.
Do you have any kids?
I do. I have 2 daughters. One is married, one is not. My married daughter has my 2 magnificent grandchildren. I have a 16-year-old granddaughter who is a world-class gymnast. And I have a grandson who's a sophomore at Rider University. And I'm very proud of him. Yes?
Have you told them the story?
Pardon me?
Like the story?
Have I told them a story? Absolutely. The first time my grandson heard the story, he was 6 years old. And he's probably heard me enough to be able to tell my story himself. Yes?
Do you have any brothers or siblings?
No, I'm an only child. It. Yes.
How do you feel telling your story?
How do I feel telling my story? I feel rewarded in the fact that some people in this room will have learned a lesson. hope all of you do, but that's a lot to ask. And if you all have learned something from what I've told, then, God willing, it will prevent it from ever happening again.
Did you think any did you have any deep thoughts when your parents told you about the story the first time? Even though it was
I didn't know the significance. My father would tell me the stories about things that he remembers from the ship and his childhood and his adulthood and what made them decide to do what they did. To me, it was just a story. It was part of my life, part of my upbringing, part of my background, but I didn't know the significance.
How would you feel if you met a German bomber?
I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea. I guess because it's never happened, I can't answer that.
Were you nervous the first time you talked about this in front of the school?
When's the first time I talked?
No, were you nervous the
When I
first
know-
time?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes.
Have you ever gotten sad from when you were ever telling the story? Like, have you ever gotten depressed when you were telling the story?
I'm very fortunate because my story is not gross. But when I listen to other survivors and the traumas that they experienced, that's what depresses me. I feel for their pain. Survivors in general have had very traumatic childhoods. And I have pain with that. And I'm grateful that I do not have that kind of memory.
How do you think your story is going to impact the world?
You tell me. How do you think it's going to impact you?
It impacts me to tell the past to newer generations, to show them the terrible history and hope that it won't happen again.
There you have it.
I would like to thank you, and I really appreciate it. I'm sure we all do for you coming here and sharing your story.